Johnny Test, a cartoon that has garnered a reputation for being one of the most hated cartoons in the cartoon community. Frequent criticisms of the show include its lazy flash animation, it being a rip-off of Dexter's Lab, and the heavy usage of a whip crack sound effect every time a character moves. But what if I told you that it wasn't always this way? What if I told you that a long time ago, Johnny Test was a fun little show about a boy with flaming hair, going on various adventures with his dog? That's right. Contrary to what literally every other cartoon YouTuber will tell you, Johnny Test actually started off as a really good cartoon. But as time went on, it progressively got worse and worse, to the point where it would no longer feel like the same cartoon. Before we begin, I would like to say one thing. This video will only be about the first season of the show. However, if this video does well, I might make more videos talking about the later seasons of the show, just so you can truly see how far the show had fallen from grace. Nobody wants to acknowledge this, but Johnny Test went through seasonal rot, in the same way shows like The Fairly Odd Parents or The Simpsons went through seasonal rot. And just because Johnny Test went through seasonal rot much faster than those two shows, doesn't mean it didn't go through seasonal rot at all. In this video, I will be examining the early days of Johnny Test, and how at one point, it was actually a pretty good show. Let us begin. Johnny Test started in 2005, not on Cartoon Network, but on Kids WB. From 2005 to 2007, the show would air exclusively on Kids WB. 2008 was both the last year that the show would air on Kids WB, and the first year that the show would air on Cartoon Network. The show would air on both networks at the same time, until Kids WB shut down in May of 2008, in which the remainder of the show would air only on Cartoon Network. The show aired for 6 seasons. The first 3 aired on Kids WB, while the latter 3 aired on Cartoon Network after Kids WB shut down. Footage of the show when it aired on Kids WB is unfortunately very scarce and hard to find, and I would really love to find more footage of the show during this time period. It doesn't even have to be from season 1. Footage from seasons 2 and 3 would be cool to find as well. I personally never grew up watching Kids WB, and I, like many others, watched Johnny Test on Cartoon Network, so seeing it on its original home network is honestly pretty bizarre to say the least. So, that's one thing that makes Johnny Test's early days different. But there's also another thing. Perhaps the most noticeable difference between the first season and the rest of the show is the animation. The stiff flash animation that the show would infamously have in its later years, completely absent in season 1. And honestly, the downgrade to flash animation wouldn't even be that bad if the first season didn't have really fluid and fast-paced animation. The art style for season 1 is different as well, bearing that distinct thick outline sharp edges art style that seemingly every cartoon from the 2000s had. The Fairly Odd Parents, Danny Phantom, My Life as a Teenage Robot, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, the later seasons of Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls, Clone High, the Total Drama series. The list goes on. In addition, the whip cracks are nowhere to be heard in season 1. And as for the claims that the show rips off Dexter's Lab, well, come on. Let's all be real. Just because the show includes geniuses and gadgets and whatnot, doesn't mean that it's a Dexter's Lab ripoff. This isn't just for season 1. This is for the whole show in general. How is it that a show like Jimmy Neutron can get off scot-free, but Johnny Test gets hit with claims that it's ripping off Dexter's Lab? What does Johnny Test have that makes it a Dexter's Lab ripoff that Jimmy Neutron doesn't have? It doesn't make any sense. This isn't me hating on Dexter's Lab or Jimmy Neutron. I grew up with all 3 of these shows, but I must wonder why one show gets a pass, while the other one doesn't. I'm sorry for going off on a bit of a tangent, but I needed to get that out of the way. Okay, so 2 of the big flaws that the later episodes of Johnny Test have are not present in season 1. What about the episodes overall? Season 1 had 26 episodes, and surprisingly, there is not a single bad episode in season 1. Every episode is really good. The fact that season 1 managed to be consistently good only makes the show's downfall even worse, since once the show became a Cartoon Network exclusive, most of the episodes range from being meh to admittedly being really bad. Now, there are 3 specific episodes that I want to focus on in this video, and these 3 episodes I think showcase just how good Johnny Test was during its first season. These episodes are Johnny to the Center of the Earth, Johnny Test, Extreme Crime Stopper, and Johnny's House of Horrors. Let us begin with Johnny to the Center of the Earth. This was the very first episode of the show, and I must say, it's a really good way to start off a show that would have such a tragic downfall. In this episode, Johnny and Dookie go underground to rescue a camera that belongs to Johnny's father. However, they come across a group of mole people, who have stolen various items in Pork Belly, including the camera. It is revealed that the mole people cannot stand bright lights, which Johnny uses to his advantage. He is able to rescue the camera, and turns it into a weapon against the mole people, by constantly taking pictures, in which the camera flash stuns the moles. At the end of the episode, Johnny is able to return the camera to his father, and the episode ends. The whole camera flashing idea is honestly pretty clever, and you will never see anything as clever as that in the later episodes of the show. For being the first ever episode of the show, this is a really strong way to start it off. But as stated before, the show would very quickly lose this level of quality. While working on this video, I did an experiment of sorts. I watched this episode, and then immediately after finishing it, I watched the final episode of the show, and let me tell you, it is one of the most depressing things you could possibly do. The drop in quality is so strong, it's not even funny. To think that these 2 episodes are from the same show, it's unbelievable. Next up, you have Johnny Test, Extreme Crime Stopper. In this episode, Johnny and Dookie attempt to stop a group of teens known as the Extreme Teen Team, who have stolen all kinds of snacks and drinks throughout Pork Belly. Eventually, they are able to stop the Extreme Teen Team by removing the word extreme off of a billboard, and putting it onto a detention center, fooling the Extreme Teen Team. Again, this kind of writing is something that you will never see in the later episodes of the show when it became a Cartoon Network exclusive. But aside from that, it's just a fun episode overall. Season 1 has a lot of fun episodes. The later seasons barely have any fun episodes in them, and the few Cartoon Network era episodes that have a fun premise end up being very poorly executed. I'll go into more detail about this later. For now though, let us move on to our final episode, and believe me, I saved the best for last. Johnny's House of Horrors is probably the best episode of season 1, if not the best episode of the entire series. In this episode, Johnny's mother has invited a client over for dinner, and Johnny's father tries to make the house as clean as possible. However, Johnny accidentally causes a huge mess in the house. As they take out the trash, Johnny and Dookie eavesdrop on Johnny's father, who brings up his notebook full of ideas for his dream house. Johnny manages to obtain the notebook, and plans to make his father's dream house become a reality. However, it turns out that Johnny had gotten his father's dream journal instead, which means that he had filled the entire house with all of his father's worst fears. In order to turn the house back to normal, the gang must reach Johnny's room to pull a switch that will make the house normal again. Again, it's a fun episode, but it's also proof that this show used to have a heart. Another common criticism I hear about the show is that Johnny is an unlikable brat, and surprise surprise, that's not present whatsoever in season 1. When Johnny states his intention to build his dad's dream house, it genuinely comes off as if he means it. Like he's sincere about wanting his father to have his dream house become a reality. And this ending moment also shows how much heart the show had at one point.
Listen, Dad, I'm sorry about all this. I just wanted you to have your dream house.
I already do, Johnny. I realized that today.
Moments like that are extremely rare, if not completely non-existent, in the Cartoon Network era of the show. I'm not sure what's sadder, the fact that this show started going downhill after season 1, or the fact that nobody wants to acknowledge that the show was good at one point. Watch any Johnny Test related video from any cartoon YouTuber, and see if they even once mentioned the show being good at one point. Spoiler alert, they won't. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The cartoon community will waste their time overanalyzing every minor and insignificant detail that's in Steven Universe, Rick and Morty, The Owl House, etc. But they won't take 5 minutes of their time to do some simple Wikipedia research on a cartoon that they unfairly hate on. Actually, no. Let me go a step further. If any of these 3 shows suffered the same fate as Johnny Test, where they have a really great first season, but then everything after is just nowhere near as good, nobody would care about any of these shows. Whatever critical acclaim these shows have garnered would be completely gone. There would be exactly 0 Owl House fans in existence if it suffered the same fate as Johnny Test. Mark my words. So, the main question is, what happened to Johnny Test? What caused it to change so drastically once season 1 ended? Well, as stated before, Johnny Test started off on Kids WB, and not on Cartoon Network. Kids WB was not its own network, but rather, it was a programming block that aired on the WB. Sometime in 2006, the WB merged with UPN, which was another television network, into becoming the CW. Because of the merger, the show had suffered severe budget cuts. The show had to downgrade to Flash animation, and everyone involved with the show had to be replaced, with the exception of Scott Fellows, the creator of the show, and the voice actors. In addition, Cookie Jar, a Canadian entertainment company, took control of the show's production after the first season was produced by Warner Bros. Animation, and that is the reason why Johnny Test became the way that it is. At the same time though, I have to wonder if this merger is really why the show changed after season 1, because literally no other Kids WB show from the same time was affected by the merger. Only Johnny Test, that weird SpongeBob knockoff with the talking fruit, completely unaffected by the merger. That edgy Looney Tunes cartoon that literally nobody remembers, completely unaffected by the merger. Why was Johnny Test the only Kids WB show to be affected by this merger? The world may never know. Sadly, this wouldn't be the last time a Warner Bros. Related merger caused bad things to happen. And you know what? Seasons 2 and 3, despite the obvious downgrade in quality, are still not bad for what they are. The whip cracks are still rare, and the Flash animation doesn't even look that stiff. Considering when these seasons were made, and the budget cuts that the show suffered, the Flash animation actually looks pretty decent. I remember reading that season 3 was originally meant to be the final season of the show, but the show was later renewed for a 4th season, which premiered in late 2009. That 4th season, let me tell you, was when everything truly went downhill for the show. That's when the whip cracks started to kick in, and that's when the Flash animation became really stiff. Even stiffer than it was in seasons 2 and 3. Again, if this video does well, then I might make more videos going into detail about how Johnny Test kept getting worse and worse with each passing season. If this show ended at season 3, like it was originally meant to, it would have a much better reputation than what it has nowadays. Because again, there's nothing necessarily bad about seasons 2 and 3, but at the same time, there's also a small part of me that wishes the show got cancelled after season 1. The show would most likely fall into obscurity if that happened, but at least it wouldn't have the bad reputation that it has. I could honestly see Johnny Test's first season getting the same treatment as shows like Invader Zim or Clone High. Short-lived cartoons from the 2000s that eventually garner cult followings that believe these shows deserved to grow bigger. There are a lot of fun episodes in season 1. In addition to the 3 that I talked about earlier, you have an episode where Johnny and Dookie enter various movies, an episode where they time travel into the future, an episode where they shrink down into an alternate version of Pork Belly. The list goes on. It's fun. The Cartoon Network era has barely any fun episodes in it, and again, the few episodes that have a fun premise end up being very poorly executed. There's a season 5 episode where Johnny and Dookie enter a gender-bent version of Pork Belly. This would have been a great episode if it was in season 1, but it's not. What really ruins this episode is that Johnny and Dookie develop crushes on their female selves, which is really uncomfortable and cringy to watch. This wouldn't be present if this was a season 1 episode, or even a season 2 or 3 episode. The Cartoon Network era of the show is really bad, there's no denying that, but admittedly, I kinda enjoy it in an ironic guilty pleasure so bad it's good sorta way. Looking at how bad the show would get, when compared to how it was for its first season, is both really funny and really depressing. Again, watching the first episode of the show, and then watching the last episode, is really depressing, but also hilarious at the same time. I'll admit it, nostalgia also plays a small part in me not truly hating the Cartoon Network era of the show. The average cartoon YouTuber will look at the later episodes of the show, and think that it's the worst abomination ever made. I, on the other hand, find them to be weirdly hilarious, but not in the way that the show intended. Lighten up, people. It's okay to laugh at bad cartoons. You don't always have to take them seriously. To wrap things up, Johnny Test shouldn't be seen as a bad cartoon, but rather, it should be seen as a good cartoon that eventually became bad. Of the many frequently hated cartoons within the cartoon community, Johnny Test is the only one that doesn't deserve the hate that it gets, and this first season alone should prove that. Anyone that believes Johnny Test is one of the worst Cartoon Network shows, if not one of the worst cartoons of all time, should watch a few season 1 episodes, and rethink their stance on the show. At least acknowledge that the show was good at one point, for God's sake. That is all that I will say. If you enjoyed this video, and you want to see a follow-up video where I talk about the rest of the show, then be sure to like the video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you are new, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.